Donald Trump is freaking out about potentially losing this upcoming election. Just a few weeks ago, Trump was certain he was going to have an easy time winning this November, but things have suddenly changed directions, and now it's not looking too good for him. And this is especially true now because the New York Times just released a new brutal poll, and this has caused Trump to absolutely snap. So we'll take a look at that poll and Trump's response in this video, but before we get into that, I think we should review how Trump has been freaking out even before this new brutal poll. So let's take a look at this article from Independent. Trump is freaking out over Kamala Harris's surging poll numbers. It's unfair. Now you'll see here, this was released 2 days ago, so this was before the new brutal New York Times poll. So this will already sort of give you insight as to how he's feeling. A week after the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, The Atlantic published a headline claiming that Trump is planning for a landslide win. Now, a little over a month and one presidential candidate swap later, the 2024 presidential election's likely results appear a little less obvious. With the defiant photo of a post-assassination attempt, Trump pumping his fist in the rear view, the former president has become increasingly frustrated with the surging poll numbers enjoyed by his presumed opponent, Vice President Kamala Harris, according to 5 people close to the situation who spoke to the Washington Post. He reportedly told a supporter that he felt it was unfair after he beat Joe Biden, he had to turn around and run against Harris. "It's unfair that I beat him and now I have to beat her too," the former president reportedly said. So of course now he's claiming, oh, it's unfair and oh, they rigged it, blah blah blah, and I already beat Biden, but now I have to fight Kamala too, This is the famous Trump playbook that we've been seeing ever since he started running. Now this article goes into much more detail than we're going to cover today, just because it's a lot of stuff that we have seen before, like this, Truth Social post of him ranting about Kamala Harris. But this is meant just to show you how unhinged and how upset Trump has been over Kamala Harris now taking the spotlight. But here's the thing, all of this does not take into account this new New York Times poll that just released. And that's this article right here. Harris leads Trump in 3 key states. New surveys of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania taken this week offer the latest indication of a dramatic reversal in standing for the Democratic Party since President Biden abandoned his re-election bid. And so here is the results. If the 2024 presidential election were held today, who would you vote for if the candidates were Kamala Harris and Donald Trump? And in all 3, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, we have Harris at 50% and Trump at 46%. Now the biggest thing between these 3 states is the margin of error. Although I will say Pennsylvania and Wisconsin are basically the same here. For Pennsylvania, it is plus or minus 4.2 points, but for Wisconsin, it is plus or minus 4.3, so just a 0.1 point difference there. And with Michigan, it's 4.8 points, so definitely a much bigger margin of error here. But you'll notice that on average, Kamala is up by 4 points, which is just amazing. So let's go ahead and read a little bit of this article to go along with this. Vice President Kamala Harris leads former President Donald Trump in 3 crucial battleground states, according to new surveys by the New York Times and Siena College. The latest indication of a dramatic reversal in standing for Democrats after President Biden's departure from the presidential race remade it. Harris is ahead of Trump by 4 percentage points in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, 50% to 46% among likely voters in each state. The surveys were conducted from August 5th to the 9th. The polls, some of the first high-quality surveys in those states since Biden announced that he would no longer run for re-election, come after nearly a year of surveys that showed either a tied contest or a slight lead for Trump over Biden. And this is why Trump was freaking out so much, because he was constantly ahead of Biden, but now that he's no longer in the equation, Kamala Harris is now far ahead of him. On question after question, the poll finds that voters don't seem to have major reservations about Kamala Harris. While the reshaped race is still in its volatile early weeks, Democrats are now in a notably stronger position in these 3 battleground states that have long been key to the party's victories, or defeats. Still, the results show vulnerabilities for Harris. Voters prefer Trump when it comes to whom they trust to handle the economy and immigration, issues that remain central to the presidential race. Now this fact is just absolutely baffling to me. Trump was terrible for the economy, and he's also terrible for immigration. And even for people who do like his immigration policy, the way that he did it was absolutely terrible. He barely added any of the border wall that he said that he was going to add. So even if you do agree with his policies on immigration, he just wasn't effective at doing it at all during his presidency. So I don't understand how you could trust Trump on either of those issues, when he historically has done both of them very poorly. Now the final thing that I want to touch on before we take a look at Trump's Trump's response to this poll is this right here. Now this measures the percentage of registered voters who said these traits describe each candidate either very well or somewhat well. Has a clear vision for this country. Trump is at 60% here. But honestly, I think this makes sense because even if you're a Democrat, yeah, it's very easy to see Trump's plan here. He wants to destroy the country. And Kamala is just getting started. She doesn't have a clear vision or a clear path that we really see yet. So it's very easy for either party to say, yeah, Trump has a pretty clear vision whether you agree with that vision or not. Has the temperament to be an effective president. And this is 54% to 45, which is accurate here. Is honest, even lower, 41 to 52. Now this one surprised me a little bit. Is intelligent, 56 to 65. Kamala's is not surprising to me, but Trump's is 56. This should be way lower. And then finally, will bring about the right kind of change, 47 to 50. So overall, aside from the clear vision for this country, Kamala is pretty much beating Trump across the board. But overall, it is very clear that this whole polling is not great news for Trump, and he's really starting to fall behind. And that leads us to Trump's website, where he released a memo on these new polls. So this says, the latest swing state polls of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin conducted by the New York Times at Siena College will hopefully include the recalled 2020 presidential vote between Trump and Biden. They have dramatically understated Trump's support both among all registered voters and in their likely voter model. In each state, the gap between the survey's recalled 2020 vote and the reported 2020 election results is more than the margin between Kamala Harris and Trump. Once again, we see a series of public surveys released with the clear intent and purpose of depressing support for Trump. And then they post a convenient little image showing what they're saying. Even with the understatement of Trump's 2020 support and an unrepresentative weighting scheme relative to their electoral vote weights between the three states, Trump leads by +1, 47 through 46. Among independents in the head-to-head ballot, has more than doubled his support among all registered black voters since 2020, is essentially tied among those of Latino or Asian heritage, has narrowed the gap among those aged 18 to 29 to single digits, and leads among registered voters who are new to the electorate and did not participate in 2020. This is nothing new, as New York Times/Siena College polls have historically understated Trump's vote share. In the final poll, completed just 4 days before the 2020 election, they found Trump trailing in Pennsylvania by 6 points and trailing in Wisconsin by 11 points. 8 days before the 2020 presidential election, they found Trump trailing in Michigan by 8 points. Now, before we get into this, one thing that I love to notice about Trump and all these Republicans is they hate the use of periods. They just love to jumble words together. Makes it so hard to read, and I think that's the point. They want this to seem like just a bunch of jumbled mess. Now here's the thing. Trump wants to make you think that, oh, the New York Times and Siena College, they're rigging this vote, and they're making it seem like Trump is losing more than he actually is. And that's just not true. That's not how these things work. When doing polling, they aim to be as accurate as they possibly can. Now sure, that does mean that, yeah, there are times where, they say, oh, one candidate's more likely to win, and then it turns out to not be true. I mean, the exact same thing happened in 2016. But here's the thing, the takeaway from that is that we shouldn't be trusting these polls in general, regardless of what they're saying. Now, it's not to say that we shouldn't trust them at all, because they do have relevance and they sort of give you an idea of where the trends are heading. Like when Biden was lower and now Kamala is higher, that shows a clear trend in the people's voice. But if you're talking about a few points difference, yes, that's all within the margin of error. They account for all that. So the takeaway that Trump and his team wants you to think here is that, because they have a history of lying, Trump is actually winning. But that is just not the case. That's not the takeaway you should have from this. The takeaway should be, this might be inaccurate. But that does not discredit the trend of Kamala rising in the polls. Regardless of if they're inaccurate by a few points here or there, Kamala is still steadily rising in the polls. And when one candidate is slowly rising, the margin of error also rises with them. So just because some polls in 2020 maybe have been a little inaccurate does not mean that Kamala is less popular than Donald Trump at this point. Now, here's the thing that I think we should all keep in mind, because this is a lesson not only for the Republicans that, oh, Trump isn't actually, winning, but it should also be a lesson for the Democrats here. Because we saw what happened in 2016. Hillary was projected to win by huge margins, and then Trump beat her by a lot. In 2020, Biden was projected to win over Trump, and then maybe it was inaccurate by a few points. He still ended up winning, but it was probably closer than we would have liked. So just because now we we have Kamala far beating Trump, we should not let that dictate our beliefs as to how this election is going to turn out, because we absolutely do not want Trump winning like he did in 2016. So regardless of what the polls say, we all need to get out and voice our vote this November.